Hi, I'm Gunbreak1, and this is Midgardia's Cool Crowdfunding Show. I'm here today with Paul Vermeeren. How's it going?
It's going good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well.
Thanks
You're
for
here.
having me.
Glad to have you. So you're here today to talk to us about Gridshock, so why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Okay, yeah. I currently have a Kickstarter. It's part of Zine Quest 3 for this, what I call synthwave superhero post apocalyptic setting that I've created called Gridshock 20XX. And that is what is on Kickstarter right now. It's got about 3 days remaining right now as of when we're shooting this. And at the moment, it's 80% funded. So I feel pretty good about it. It's an ambitious Kickstarter. It's the first one I've ever done. So I've definitely learned a lot in this process. And yeah, I'm just here to answer any questions about it or give you the elevator pitch or whatever else you want to know.
Well, let's hear the elevator pitch.
All right. So the elevator pitch is actually it's directly on the Kickstarter, but I'll say it anyway. So the idea is in 1945, superheroes saved the world. In 1986, it ended. And 20XX, supervillains rule what's left. So that's Gridshock 20XX. That's the idea in a nutshell. If I was talking to Hollywood producer and trying to get them to get excited about this thing, that's what I would try to throw at them.
Yeah, it'd be like the tagline on the poster.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think in that mode a lot. So if you look at the Kickstarter, you'll probably see a lot of language that sounds like a little cheesy because I'm kind of going for that 80s movie trailer or movie poster feel. Like, I want you to hear that voice, the inner world guy, you know. That's the kind of game we're talking about here.
I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that for the genre. It
Yeah.
would,
I mean, that's,
yeah.
yeah, sorry. That's
Um,
definitely the vibe I'm going for there.
yeah, for sure. Um, so what's the setting of Gridshock like? In slightly finer strokes.
Okay, so I can zoom in a little bit. The basic idea is that there was this horrible reality warping disaster that happened in the year 1986. Before that, it was your typical superhero universe, more or less. There were some things that were maybe a little bit different, but it has kind of analogs for almost any typical superhero stuff that you can think of, and also analogs for a lot of stuff from the 80s because this whole thing has a very kind of retro vibe to it. So it had things that are kind of like GI Joe in there as well, and things that are kind of like Mask or whatever. So basically anything you can think of that is superhero like or action movie like or action figure cartoony like probably happened at some point in this setting's past. It's set up for you to be able to plug pretty much any of that stuff that you might want in there if it's not specifically noted as existing. But anyway, 1986, something horrible happens, and most of the superheroes get wiped out in an attempt to stop it. And civilization basically gets destroyed in the aftermath. There's this huge shockwave that comes out. Something like 30 to 40% of the human population disappears. Nobody knows where they go. So civilization gets all screwed up. And this will probably sound sort of familiar if you're up on your superhero stuff, but there's nothing wrong, I think, with like kind of taking familiar tropes and running with them and seeing what you can do with it. So after that, the government collapses, all that kind of stuff, and supervillains essentially end up in charge. They're the ones who take control since most of the superheroes are gone. There are a few heroes left, but most of them end up working along with the supervillains in an attempt to kind of restore some semblance of order. And you end up with a kind of totalitarian state that's running most of North America. Um, by the time that the game takes place, that state is actually already starting to collapse. So it's kind of like a second apocalypse, if you want to look at it that way. And new heroes have started to kind of spontaneously appear. And these guys are called vectors. They have this ability to kind of get reality on their side, which has very much not been the case in this world that was supposed to be heroic. It's been villainous for decades now. So things seem to be starting to kind of balance, and your player characters are these vectors, these people who can kind of tilt the scales in their favor. And that's just an easy way for me to kind of explain something that's a mechanic in a lot of different role playing games, where you might have luck points or inspiration or determination or fate points or whatever. Um, and there's kind of like an in-game reason for that stuff. Why are your characters successful where other people might fail? So your characters are these vectors, and it's your job to not only fight to survive like everybody else is doing in this world that I've created, but also fight for what's right. So it's a little bit different from the typical superhero setup where your characters are kind of waiting for bad things to happen and then go react to them. The bad stuff is already happening everywhere. And your characters are sort of on the run, but also trying to make a difference. So the idea was to make a post-apocalyptic world out of this superhero genre that still gives you something playable, something that's set up to be a role-playing game. So it's got a little bit of that points of light setup that so many successful settings have. So anyway, I think that sort of answers your question. I didn't go into a ton of detail about all the different regions. There's all sorts of different regions that kind of have different flavors of villains in charge. And so they have different themes, but hopefully that sort of gets across the idea.
Right, so you're surrounded by a radioactive wasteland full of all of these like weird things supervillains have built, like doom bots and like wandering mutants and stuff like that, and you
Yeah,
can punch things incredibly hard and shoot lasers from your eyes. Is that
that's
about
right.
right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of radioactive stuff necessarily, but your idea of there being, just all sorts of basically anything that could run rampant in a superhero universe is running rampant. So that means, there's evil robots running around. Like you said, there's mutants running around. There's dinosaurs running around. There's there's pretty much whatever. It sounds pretty gonzo, but I did my best to create a kind of cohesive reason for all of this stuff to exist. So although it is a very sort of over the top setting in terms of the elements that are there, there's also a backstory and an explanation for pretty much everything is there. And hopefully still enough room for individual GMs and individual players to create their own stuff and put it in here. Because when I started thinking about this game, I was like, what kind of background can I make for a post-apocalyptic world that would allow me to include pretty much anything that somebody would want to, and it would seem in genre instead of just random, bizarre stuff happening all over the place. And I was like, well, superhero genre includes everything. It's got, you know, um, street level action. It's got cosmic stuff. It's got, if you look at the Marvel universe, there's dinosaurs in the Savage Land. There's a, medieval village ruled by an evil dictator. There's all this crazy stuff that's all
Literally,
happening in the same world. So I was like, this
literal.
seems like a natural fit.
Yeah, you got literal Thor running around and all kinds of fun stuff.
Right. So that was the idea, is like I wanted to make it, even though it may not necessarily be spelled out in the setting and in these 4 zines that you get as part of the Kickstarter, there's room for pretty much any of that stuff that you want to put in there. Like I had, when I was playtesting, I hadn't really gotten into cosmic stuff too much because the game takes place in a post-apocalyptic North America. But maybe eventually further down the road we'll expand out and cover more parts of the world. But for right now, I'm sticking to North America, which is plenty, for me anyway. But yeah, there's a possibility, there's an opening there. I was like, I didn't really think about like outer space stuff or aliens or cosmic stuff that much. But this guy's like, yeah, I want to be like this astronaut who went off into space and then came back after the apocalypse and everything has changed and now I've got powers. And I was like, there's absolutely nothing in these books that would stop you from doing that. So let's do it. And character fit right in. He made this dude named Captain Cosmic, who was like this kind of throwback superhero, and it worked out really well, even though everybody else was playing these kind of like hard-edged, sort of cyberpunky, sort of Mad Maxy type characters. This dude fit right in, and he had his like own little niche. So that's the nice thing about using a superhero backdrop, I think, is you can really explain away pretty much anything that you want to.
Yeah, people are very used to, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman all hanging out.
Right. And it's like, even if you just look at one character's book, like you look at like Spider-Man, there's Morbius, there's this vampire guy that he runs into sometimes. Like, no, he's not literally a vampire, but for all intents and purposes, yeah, he's a vampire. And that makes me think a little bit about stuff that I read about when, even though I'm not necessarily the most old school gamer in the world, I read about when Gary Gygax was coming up with Dungeons and Dragons. He was just kind of like, here's all my favorite fantasy books. I'm going to take elements from all of them and just kind of jam them together. And I did sort of the same thing, except I would look back at the stuff that I liked when I was a kid, and I tried to make something that would accommodate all of that. And I did put a little bit more effort, maybe than D&D did early on, into explaining like why it's all there. But I still, hopefully, at least I think so. There's, like I said, there's room for other stuff at the risk of sounding redundant or repeating myself.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned different types of genomes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's not like I don't go into a ton of detail about that, but there are characters in it. There's 12 playable character templates in the game. And I should mention before I go into too much about that, when there are stats in these zines, there's not actually a ton of stats. When there are stats, they're assuming that you're using the Icon's superpowered role-playing system. That's been around for a few years. It's a solid superhero game. It's fairly popular, though. Really, there is no super popular. Sorry, that sounds kind of hokey, but there's no extremely popular superhero game right now. I chose Icons because its stats are fairly simple. They're on a scale of 1 to 10. You can kind of look at them and eyeball them and go, okay, I can make a guess as to like how that's going to work in this other system, just in case Icons ends up not being your thing. Icons is also a lot like the old Marvel game, but mechanically it works a lot more like a new school narrative game. So it's a nice balance. But anyway, so these 12 templates that I've made, they span the range of lots of different things. And you're not just limited to those 12 templates. You can make any kind of superhero character you want using the icon system, but the templates are there just in case you want to make a character quickly and you want to make a character that's definitely going to like fit into this world and have a clearly defined role in it. But as far as like the genetically, mutated characters, there's a couple of different kinds. There are the neogenics, who are people who kind of spontaneously manifest powers. They're similar to like the mutants you get from the Marvel Universe, like X-Men or whatever. It's the same basic idea. They have mostly started popping up in recent years, but they're part of the setting. They've been around for a long time. There's also characters called hybroids. And hybroids were made by one of the kind of supervillainous regions in the recent past to serve as laborers. And they are beings who are made of human DNA, non-human DNA, and superhuman DNA. So a lot of time they look kind of animalistic. They may not always. They may look like plant people. They may look like regular humans. It's really up to you what they look like, but that's kind of there for, I know there's a lot of people who really are interested in playing characters who kind of combine human aspects with non-human aspects. So that's kind of what those guys are there for. And they show up a lot in some of the promo artwork that I've been sharing. So
right, so hybrids are, yeah.
People
So
seem to like that stuff.
yeah, no, furries are quite popular. Not that all of them are furries necessarily, but
yeah, they're not all furries. In fact, one of the early character sketches that I got was like a cactus guy, and I was really into that. But I was like, you know what? It should probably be like an animal person, because I think more people are going to be like more excited to do that. So let's go with that.
yeah. So basically what I'm getting from this is like, if you want a Kamen Rider, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, and off-brand Superman to run around punching things in the face, like
Yes.
Lord Humongous from Mad Max, this is your game.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, in fact, like as you listed those off, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, yeah, that's going to be probably a Gate Crasher for the Superman ripoff, a Hybroid for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, and an Ultranite for the Kamen Rider guy. Because there's also a template in there that's kind of Sentai-like that's called the Ultranite. So yeah, that team is absolutely doable straight out of the box, or straight out of the zine, I should say.
Yeah. Zines, plural. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that as well?
So it's a 4-zine set. And this is one of those things where if I had to do it over again, I may not have chosen to go that route. This is my first Kickstarter. And the fact that I decided to start with a 4-zine set is really ambitious, maybe a little bit too ambitious, but we're going to see. I'm still feeling pretty positive about it. But anyway, each zine kind of covers a different aspect of this setting. So you get 4 zines, which is why the price is slightly higher than what you would normally get from a Zine Quest Kickstarter. Usually those are, pretty dang cheap because you're just getting one zine. This is 4 zines, so it's a little bit more expensive. I like to think it's still pretty reasonable, but people can make up their own mind on that. But one zine is called the Roadmap, which is kind of like the player's guide. It's the overview of the setting. It gives you the real, just general basics of what's going on, and it also has some rules tweaks. So if you are using icons, it advises you on how to change the rules a little bit to make it more Gridshocky. The second one is the Gridshock regions, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's more detailed information on each of the 8 major regions of the setting. And I say more detailed, it's still not going to be super detailed because this is still a zine, right? So each one gets a few pages. It's not going to be like you're getting an entire source book on each region. So it just kind of tells you in broad strokes what's going on there, who the major players are, what the general themes of this thing are, and what kind of stuff can your characters get up to in that area. Then the actually, hang on, look, I'm spacing out on what the third one is now. Oh, the third one is the Gridshock roster, which is just it's the templates, those character templates that I was talking about earlier. That goes into detail about all of those. It gives you their stats and icons. But even if you're not using icons, you can take a look at that and see, what is the deal with these guys? What are they about? And like I said, there's still room for a character concept that doesn't necessarily fit into one of those templates. The templates are really there either to get you going like immediately, like you don't want to mess around trying to think up your own character and figuring out how to move all the points around and all that stuff. This will let you make a character really quickly. And each of those 12 templates has one just basic, build, if you want to call that, and then 3 variants. So the 3 variants will kind of show you how you can tweak this to make a slightly different style of character. Just as a quick example, there's a template called the Revenant, which is basically an undead superhero. Like you're a superhero who got killed, but you're still out there kicking butt. So the generic setup for that is there, but one of the variants is called the Spectroid, and that means that you actually don't have a physical body anymore. So it tells you how to tweak those characters' rules if you want to be like this kind of incorporeal ghost superhero. And then the final zine, before I get off on yet another huge tangent, is the Gridshock reference, which has jokingly been called the Encyclopedia in the past. It's kind of a big glossary. If you're a big enough comic book nerd that you've ever looked at a Marvel Universe handbook, like the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, or a DC Who's Who, it's kind of like that, but less emphasis on individual characters and more emphasis on the setting and the backstory. So if you are the type of person who really wants to dig into how this world got this way and what are these little references that you've peppered in here and there, you can look those things up. So when you're reading the text of, like, let's say the Regions book and something is in bold and it doesn't really explain in great detail what that is, you can bust out the reference and look it up and it'll have a couple paragraphs telling you what is that. So if you're reading something and it says, oh, this guy is a grid jockey, you're like, what is a grid jockey? You could break out the reference, look up grid jockeys, and they'll tell you their whole deal, where they came from and what they can do.
Nice.
So those are the 4 zines.
Yeah, and that's 20 USD. Like, that's not bad for all of that.
Yeah, in PDF, it's $19 US, and for the print, it's a little bit more expensive. It's $39 in print, but still, that's that's about $10 a zine. I think that's not too crazy. They're fully illustrated. It's not stock art. I had a couple people that speculated that it was stock art. It's not. Let me just be clear about that. I'm working with an artist from Belgium named Stephen DeWale, and he's done all the illustrations for the whole project. So if this thing funds, I will be able to get even more artwork for this thing and make it really sharp looking, I hope.
And it's some good stuff. It's very reminiscent of like the Cyberpunk 2020 book or early Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad that you say that because that's kind of the vibe I'm going for. I'm going for like an 80s indie comic, kind of look where it's like it's black and white. It's got that sort of like obsessive level of detail. Like that's kind of what I'm going for. So thanks for that. I appreciate it.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
That's great to hear because sometimes it's a tough sell, but I'm glad that that's working.
Yeah. So you mentioned the regions. I'm gonna pick one at definitely not random at all. Why don't you tell me a little bit about Canada and the horrible world of 20XX?
All right. So Canada is left somewhat vague, but not totally vague. because the United States borders don't exist anymore. The government has collapsed. So many of the regions that are described in there extend well upwards into what is currently Canada. So it depends on where you are. I guess I'll start on the West Coast and move my way to the
Sure.
east. If you're on the West Coast, like British Columbia, obviously, you're going to be in a region that's called Cascadia. And Cascadia is kind of like a wilderness. It's an area where the government really never was able to reestablish anything. So it's kind of like lots of little independent fiefdoms. The people there are somewhat Luddite. They're a little suspicious of technology, but there's a reason for that, because there is a giant base there that people call the Toy Box. And the Toy Box was formerly the government headquarters of a international terrorism fighting force called the Guard, which is very similar to G.I. Joe or Action Man or any of that kind of stuff. So this base has gotten, after this weird apocalypse that happened, has gotten merged with some sort of analogous location in another reality. So now it's kind of like a horrible combination of a G.I. Joe playset and Castle Grayskull kind of mashed together. Or maybe Snake Mountain would be a better one, because it's definitely evil. So it's basically this G.I. Joe dungeon that people go into. They loot crazy weaponry out of it that these guys used to have back in the day, and now it's like sort of magical, sort of technological, and very scary. So that's Cascadia. If you're further north than that, like up into, even up into Alaska and over, that is an area that's called Beringia, and that is ruled by what I will quickly call a priesthood / criminal enterprise called the Temple. And they have sort of taken advantage of one of this reality's Doctor Strange type characters, and they have made her the sort of figurehead for this religion that she actually wants nothing to do with. And these guys sort of control trade over the entire continent. Let's see, if we keep moving over, you start getting into an area that's called Deadside, which is basically the area around the Great Lakes is the epicenter of this disaster that happened. That's called the Shock, hence the name of the game, or the setting, I should say. But Deadside is this huge blasted out, dead zone that's infested with what are called exhumans. And exhumans are, as you probably kind of guessed, sort of like techno zombies. And they are spreading out from this epicenter and destroying stuff in, everything that surrounds it. Around Deadside, the what's basically like the evil totalitarian government, the Supremacy, has created something that they call the New Homelands, but most people just call Fragland, which is sort of this DMZ to surround Deadside. And that's where they send all of their undesirables. So if you're an intellectual, if you're like, a veteran who's maybe a little bit of a rabble rouser, anybody who they don't really want to deal with, they'll send them out to the New Homelands to, protect the Supremacy from these people. There is a Supremacy enclave on the West Coast called Sunrise Sector, but that doesn't extend up into Canada. And you were asking specifically about Canada, but they are down there. The other big enclave of the Supremacy is on the East Coast, and that's called Seaboard Sector. And honestly, I don't like to make huge, false equivalences or anything like that. But if you've seen or read any Judge Dredd stuff, about Mega City 1, that's kind of how Seaboard Sector is. And Seaboard Sector extends all the way up into the Maritimes. So that's, way up into Canada.
Right. I love it.
Cool.
My blessed homeland of Alberta is tragically left out, but
I'm sorry about that.
Oh, it's all
there's it would probably have like a little bit of overlap between a couple of those.
Yeah.
There's other sectors that are down towards the south, but we won't get into that because that's outside the scope of your question.
It's okay. Alberta's probably an environmental hellscape at that point anyway.
I think Alberta would mostly be wouldn't be Deadside. It would probably be kind of like an extension of Cascadia, or there's also spread out across the whole of the whole entirety of the North American continent. There's what are called satellite sectors, which are basically like little tiny enclaves that are affiliated with the Supremacy, but maybe not part of the main infrastructure. And those are just kind of like They're not really detailed. You can put one wherever you want. So if you want to make like a one-shot adventure that's just like, some city that's ruled by, some crazy supervillain that you came up with, bam, just make that a satellite sector, and there you go. So you can put those anywhere you want. The setting is not in so much detail that there's no room for you to like put in other stuff.
Yeah, there's no like definitive atlas with exact borders and population numbers or.
Yeah, I will probably need to get a cartographer to at least give like some vague idea of where this stuff is going on and where these cities are, because there's a few cities that are named and described, but there's a lot of just open space and a lot of like kind of fuzzy borders. It's not like the nation state is really a thing anymore.
Yeah, and to be fair, if you do the map from like a in-universe perspective, they don't really know.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Part of the reason there's a lot of stuff that people don't really know because things are really scary now. Most people don't leave their town if they can help it, and even how much time has passed is kind of not really clear because reality got so screwy. So that's partly why it's called 20XX. It's like there's an understanding that we are somewhere in the 21st century, but people aren't really sure if 30 years have gone by, if 60 years have gone by. Maybe it's different in different places. It's just not really clear. So that gives you lots of room, because that means that if you want to be a superhero who is from the 1970s and he's still running around, we don't really know how much time has passed. So sure, why not?
And we all have occasional terrible flashbacks to what we saw during the event. Yeah.
Exactly.
We believe it.
I did that on purpose also because, comic books always have this kind of sliding time scale where it's like, wait a minute. The Punisher was in Vietnam? Doesn't that mean he's like 60 something? So it's like, you have to kind of like fudge this stuff.
Yeah, the Punisher's been in every war.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. He was in everything. Leave me alone.
Don't think too hard about it.
Yeah. Not like I really want the Punisher to be in this, though. But anyway.
I mean, yeah.
That's a whole different story.
Oh, yeah. I guess that is a particularly sensitive one. Yeah, and like Spider-Man has been roughly 16 for pretty much forever.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's in his 20s now, maybe 30s, but it really depends on what story you read.
Don't worry, he'll be 16 again soon.
Yeah. A writer will show up who wants him to be in high school, so he will be.
Oh, married Spider-Man isn't interesting. He's gonna make a deal with the devil.
Yeah, adult Spider-Man, we don't want that. Yeah, so we'll see.
I love
anything's
comic
possible.
Books. Yeah. Well, do you have anything else you'd like to bring up about Gridshock 20XX?
Let's see. I talked a little bit about how it has a rules system, but it's not really a standalone game. I just want to make that clear. I try to make that perfectly clear on the Kickstarter as well. But I also want to make it clear that it's not really just all about the stats. You're not going to get that much rules content in this thing. It's really more of a setting. So the emphasis is on that. And I think I also kind of neglected to mention that with all of these weird regions that I've set up all over North America, the sort of default mode of play, like you could really do, anything that you could do in any kind of post-apocalyptic or dystopian or superhero thing in this setting. But the sort of assumed mode of play is that you guys are going to have what's called a motor rig, which is basically like a super big rig truck, and that you are going to be using that as kind of a cover for why you are traveling all over the place and getting into trouble everywhere you go. So, I'm dating myself big time here, but if you ever saw the A-Team, where they kind of truck around the United States in this van looking for trouble, that's sort of the idea here. But so if you look at the mock-up of the cover of the first zine on the Kickstarter, it's got this huge semi truck on tractor treads, driving through a checkpoint and throwing, fascist troops in every direction. So that's kind of what's intended as the default. But if you wanted to be, mutants trying to survive in arcology, in Sunrise Sector, or you wanted to be musicians trying to make it big in Fragland, that totally works too. And I've play tested all that stuff too. So.
I want to be a mutant motorcycle gang.
Yeah. Actually, we did play around with that idea too. So yeah, obviously, I am a big Akira fan. So if you wanted to try and do some Akira action, in fact, I've got my Akira hat right here.
Nice.
But so yeah, if you wanted to do something like that, where it's like your maybe motorcycle gang who has been uh, experimented upon by the bad guys, then been given powers, then that's totally a way to go too.
Nice. I'm digging it. I've been
Yeah,
playing God Eater and Crossout recently, so this is pretty much the perfect game, being an odd mix between both of those things.
yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Well, Paul, it's been good having you on. This looks like a great project, and by the time this video goes up, there'll be about 2 days left on it. So if you're watching this, please back the project. I'm probably gonna, and I want these books. Please back it.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
And yeah. Any final words you'd like to say?
Just want to extend my appreciation to you for allowing me to talk about my game. It's been a pleasure. And just to reiterate, yeah, I hope people will check it out, even if it ends up not being your thing. You know, somebody else who is into that type of stuff, help spread the word. And I really appreciate it.
All right. And yeah, thanks for watching, and have a good night.
Have a good one.